Hi, everyone. Welcome to this little different episode of our Global Speaker Series. This is a pre-recorded episode, and I'll explain why. I'm really excited to introduce Dr. Vijay Laxmi. She is the Director of Information Security at Iron Mountain. She is currently in India. Thus, with the time difference, it was the only way to do this was to kind of do this pre-recorded. I had the great pleasure of working with her several years ago, and over the years, in this issue of global data protection. I'm quite honestly, I'm going to turn it right over to Dr. Laxmi to talk about her research and her experience. And I hope that this is a great opportunity to learn some insights. So, Dr. Vijay Laxmi, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for introducing me. And I am here to share my slides so you guys can actually hear me and see me. So I hope you guys can see my slides. So as Dr. Detwiler
Oh,
introduced
actually,
me, I'm
go ahead and maximize the slides, though. Uh,
okay.
hit
One
the
second.
show button.
I did. Show 1 second. Stop presenting.
Oh, you have two monitors?
No, one, but I have. So you can cut this one after. That's fine. Let me do from class slide.
There you go. That's perfect.
Okay. So I'm continuing on how Dr. Bhatt introduced me. So just giving you a little bit of background. I'm an information security architect with over 30 years experience in the tech industry. And I have focused on various activities like digital security, integration strategy, and competitive strategy. Major companies that I worked is Biopharma, Schneider Electric, Intuit, and Microsoft. And currently, as Dr. Detwiler mentioned, I am a director of information security, overseeing cybersecurity strategies and collaborate with my other IT members and CISO teams to craft custom security plans. My team and I implement key cybersecurity initiatives to protect and manage data securely. And you can see that I have highlighted manage data securely. Why? Because we are going to talk about the data protection. My research was on the EU General Data Protection Regulation. You may be wondering why an IT person is pursuing a doctorate in law and policy. Every time I actually tell somebody that I am pursuing or I have a doctorate in law and policy, most people don't understand the intersection. They think an IT and law cannot correlate. Once I start explaining the intersection and how it helps me in my job and expands my knowledge, people tend to recognize and admire it. Law and policy are such a unique area that applies to every industry. So people should not think about like, oh, you are in a bank, why would you consider law and policy? Or you are a doctor, why would you consider law and policy? Law and policies are applying to every industry. So how did I start my this journey? Encouraged, I was encouraged by my chief information security officer at a major biopharma. And after that, I delve into law and policy to understand what will be the implication of this law in the biotech sector or a technology. If you look at the EU, European Union General Data Protection Regulation, or I would say GDPR, it's not rocket science. It was to protect the privacy and personal data of EU residents. Okay. It doesn't matter whether the EU resident is living somewhere else or traveling somewhere else, or the some companies are actually catering to the European citizens, but they are in the non-European area. So it defined the new rights for consumers and new obligations. Let me give you an example. Do you guys know about Cambridge Analytica? What happened with Cambridge Analytica? This, right? They took the data of all the people on the Facebook. Doesn't matter where they live, without their consent. So this is to protect the consumer. That is the first law, to protect the consumer on uh, giving giving the equipment to them to basically ask the companies what they're doing with their information. And if you imagine today, before this thing, if you go to any US medical at that time, I'm saying like 5 years ago, um, you ask any doctor about medical thing, they will not actually give you x-rays or information. They will give it to the other doctor. Now you can actually ask that. Okay. So what GDPR is, it was basic seven principles and right of subject. It wasn't a rocket science. It's a common sense. But now it formed into the law. Okay. So compliance required a technical competence, it required an institutional commitment and high financial investment. And if you don't comply, there was a penalty. Okay. In 2017, when I was doing a research, Marriott breach was the biggest one because it lost billion of dollars. Since 2018, if you think about, in 5 years, the EU has collected 2.77 billion. The biggest one is Meta, which you understand, Facebook. Mm, They are the one who are giving the money. Mm, So transitioning to, if you look at if you see this particular figure, Ireland is the first one which got the majority of fines. Why? Because Google, Facebook, all of their data centers are actually there. Okay. So GDPR is a very successful law. People are still complying to it. And in the 5 years, many people mm, understood, many companies understood. There are four areas are still the biggest one, which is the insufficient legal basis for data processing. Means companies can process without understanding that they are doing it. There are 495 fines. There's a non-compliance with general data protection principle, or people have insufficient technical and organization measures to protect the data. Okay. Now you look at Colonial Pipeline. Okay. Colonial Pipeline is a company that thought that we will do the cybersecurity. Nobody will attack us because we are in our four walls. Well, one can actually go into your industry in your four walls, take the USB, infect the the machine, and guess what? The whole thing stopped. Now you are impacting the consumer. So GDPR just started to protect the personal human being or personal European citizen. But if you look at it underneath GDPR, cybersecurity, information security, these are all correlated. Coming back, why was I interested in Saudi Arabia? Like why I picked Saudi Arabia for impact of GDPR. I wanted to take my research in such a manner that it impacts the society. Okay. What concerns society? So I looked at what concerns society, economy. What is the most influencing factor for economy? Oil. Okay. So who are the countries who have the more control on oil producing? It's OPEC. Under OPEC, I looked at Saudi Arabia because it is the biggest influencer. At the same time, Saudi Arabia has a Vision 2030 to diversify their economy to develop non-oil sectors like tourism, logistics, digitization. And at that time, personal data is the new oil of the internet. That's what people were used to say. So here you have a oil influencer country trying to diversify their economy to non-oil sector, tourism and logistic with digitization. And they have passed several laws like electronic transaction, e-commerce law. However, at that time, there was no cybercrime law. Okay. So my research question was, how can a country like Saudi Arabia move forward with their diversification when such a law, a foreign law is coming, and whether it has an impact on them or not? So what I did, I narrowed down what is the technical, legal, financial impact of EU GDPR on Saudi tourism and logistics sector. So you got my point. That's how I refined my research question. Once I started dealing, reviewing the literature, and now my final time is like, how do I actually get more information? Okay. Here is another problem. As a woman who doesn't speak Arabic, reaching out to Saudi Arabian companies posed a challenge. S- So I started a call and I learned some few Arabic words. I always start my call with few Arabic words, then switch to English if they are okay. Did not know anybody, scored through LinkedIn, find out first level, second level, third level contact, and call them. This is the country where successful dealings happen face to face. So I did not know anybody. I have got two fortunate things happened for me. One, there was a GDPR event in Belgium in 2017 when the final law was shaping up. And I got a chance to be part of that meeting. There I connected with Saudi representative, and thanks to the advice from Canadian lawmaker, after thorough discussion, they recognized, the Saudi representatives recognized the validity of my research, allowed me to move forward. Second, I attended then security trade show in 2017, and at that time, you may know Khashoggi just died in October. And I went in November with to engage with Saudi executives in Saudi Arabia. Despite initial misconception, my conversation with Saudi executives were very productive, and they provided me the insight into the region's culture and legal nuances, which I did not know by doing my literature review, and how it can shape the data protection practices. So, through my extensive research and analysis, I uncovered six findings. Okay. The six findings were that the people were unaware of this regulation. Okay. Just it's a foreign law. They don't understand this concept. Okay. Second, the people controls. Okay. No, not there are not many people skilled in understanding how to protect the IT data or data security. Most of the Saudi main big companies, they were relying on the consultants from outside countries like EU, UK, and US. Okay. Third finding, process. It's a it's not just Saudi Arabian concept, I would say. Um, I found out, and this is the interviews actually told, unless and until there is a catastrophic event or critical, it's hard to implement the controls. So if the risk is not critical, then they may not be implementing the controls. Okay. And this is not unique to Saudi Arabia. Only recently, you see many companies in the US have started implementing it after seeing so many fines being put out or so many ransomware events. Okay. On the technology wise, uh, they not they're not skilled technical people there, and on average they spend only 1% of their annual revenue on compliance. Forget about GDPR, they audit regular compliance and ISO 27002. So sixth finding was, they were saying unless the Saudi government says something, nothing will happen. Okay. Then I found out specific to tourism. Hmm? This is a common to Saudi Arabia as an institution, that low level of GDPR awareness, only critical risks are addressed, and they keep data forever. There's a lot of influence of top management, which is opposite to GDPR. GDPR says that you keep the data as long as you need for the services that you are providing. After that, you finish the service, you move the data. But this is in contrast to that. Okay. The things that I found unique to tourism, which contradicted my literature review. My literature review was showing medical tourism, growth in medical tourism. And when I found in talking to the tourism companies, that's not the reason. The growth is in the religious and leisure, and people go for Hajj and Makkah. The lack of financial investment in training. Just training is not considered, like they just think that they can find consultants outside. Why train? And the tourism companies use public cloud infrastructure. So if you think about from the GDPR or cybersecurity, they are at the most risk. If they don't understand the implications of not protecting the data properly, they may be the one who will be getting more fines. Mm. If you look at logistic is a shipping, right? So they follow international logistic. They have a very complex IT system. So imagine if they don't protect, if they don't look at GDPR seriously, then implementing that, because they have such a complex, is a huge problem. And they use hybrid cloud infrastructure. So they have something is in on-prem and something is in the cloud. That again creates a cybersecurity issue. Mm. So the key implications that I found out is government and top management build the awareness. Okay. Top management prioritize the data protection. Government create initiatives to build a skilled workforce. And government create a national data protection law and enforcement. If you have these four, these are the implications that I found from my findings. So when I put my recommendation, recommended six things. Create journal awareness. And how will the journal awareness be created? Once the government actually creates a campaign. As I mentioned, Saudi companies rely on the outside data consultants. So if they create a general trade awareness, people will get trained, and they may have the local people trained, understand how to do the data protection. And once you have that, you can also look at the risk impact assessment. What this is, once the once the data protection understand, you understand the risk impact assessment, you it's a two-way road. You can actually provide how your company can increase the compliance, and this way you can actually ask for more money. That's one way of doing it. Second thing is government provide incentive to increase the compliance. Okay. You increase the contribution from the Saudi government agency, you look at the future research. So all these six things were recommended to support their vision 2030 by using GDPR as one of the lever. Okay. If I would have to do this research again, now the technology has changed, the landscape has changed. Most of the countries now have their own data protection law. Saudi Arabia also had their now data protection law, which they did not before. 2023, they finally enforced. Okay. When I recommended these 6 steps, out of these 6, the 3 were immediately implemented in the next year. That's the power of doctorate in law and policy. Doctorate in law and policy actually helps you understand what can you do really, not theoretically, can really. And you will feel satisfaction when you provide your recommendation and and the other country or company use it to enhance their growth. That will be fantastic, right? So if I have to do this research again, I would go deeper with the maturation of GDPR enforcement across the border. Now we can delve deeper into how the Saudi Arabia tourism and logistic industry have adapted and potentially revealing nuanced strategies, regulatory compliance challenges, emerging market opportunities. Considering the geopolitical dynamics, such as the evolving EU Saudi relations, kingdom's own legislative, will enrich the comparative analysis and it will provide a more comprehensive understanding on the ongoing impact of GDPR on Saudi Arabian sectors. Another aspect, if you are a new researcher, you should see this. We are standing at a similar place like 2016, when in 2016 the EU was formulating GDPR. Now the world is trying to formulate and regulate artificial intelligence. So whether you are from IT or a law or a commerce or a medical or a business, there is no better time to actually do the doctorate in law and policy and pick these subjects like AI, like how to regulate AI. Thank you for joining me for this lecture. Remember, every challenge presents an opportunity for growth and discovery. Thank you.
Dr. Laxmi, thank you very much. I I couldn't help but thinking about the fact that whether we're talking about GDPRs or we're talking about sustainable development goals, when we look at the idea of, like you were talking about Saudi Arabia 2030, when we look at the goal for achieving, sustainable development or whatever, it's not just like we're going to talk about it here and then we're going to see what happens over this period of time. Like you said, the awareness, the public awareness, the industry awareness, even the government awareness evolves as the technology evolves, as the political landscape evolves, even as the economic landscape evolves. So to me, what's almost unwritten about these goals and targets, when we think, oh, 2030, it's so far from now, kind of a thing, which is actually not necessarily that far away, is just the advancement of through discourse and experience in the awareness and understanding. And clearly, you've been able to see this since you started that initial research. And do you see that? So the students in this course, they're looking at the European Union, at the UK, and at Asian Pacific nations, and they're going to be presenting their findings to experts in the cybersecurity field. This, to me, takes on, it's way much more than just an assignment for a grade, and I'm sure you saw this as well. Research and communicating findings of research, you so eloquently communicated the impact that it can have on other people. What is one of the biggest takeaways or the biggest successes that you see personally, because you work in this field. You're not just a student who has this degree. You work in this field. What is one of the biggest successes or biggest achievements that you've seen as a result of your research all those years ago?
Everywhere I discuss, so I'm an IT person, I'm a security person. Every time my company or anywhere there is a contract, legal contract is created. Now I made my own space. So the legal actually comes back to me and say, can you review this to make sure we are good? So what when when you are as a part of a company, you are in one role. But then when other roles understand that we understand them and we speak their language, it makes the process easier and simpler. If I would have been an IT person, I wouldn't understand what legal language is. And now legal is also starting to understand what GDPR is and how the data security is, because they are finding the contracts. But when we are mixing together the conversation with the customer and the conversation for the company, it becomes so easier.
Wow. Wow. Well, I want to thank you, and I want to make sure I communicate my appreciation. You talked about this a little bit, but realize I want the audience to realize that you talked about language barriers in your research, but there were so many other barriers. And I know because of the work and all the meetings we had over the years. You had language barriers, cultural barriers, nation barriers, even the way you were perceived as a female, chasing down some of these people to interview and to communicate with, going into a country where now, I remember one of the stories you were you're sharing with me was how there was this kind of perception because you were female. You persisted through all of these obstacles, and I just want to make sure to take an opportunity to commend you on again your persistence, and I don't think that many people on the surface would realize what obstacles you overcame.
Thank you. And you helped me. Remember,
I do.
see,
I remember. I
when
remember. I remember talking with lawyers on your
exactly.
behalf.
So,
I don't want
so,
to go into
so
detail about it, but I remember it was like, okay, I've got to put on some different hats in terms of being an ally for my doctoral candidate there. And I got to tell you, it was an honor and a pleasure to be able to do that work. And I'm glad that we came out victorious and successful in those
yes,
means. But it's amazing when you look at the idea of something so simple. You have to have awareness. After you have awareness, you can have allies. From that, now you can develop a pool of advocates. And yet,
yes,
even within that advocacy, you can find some activists, but you can't be
correct.
all of those, and you can't be any of those unless you have that foundation of awareness at the beginning.
You're absolutely right. And I have one thing to tell everybody. Research, you may actually think like you know all the answers in the very beginning. And I think everybody does that when we start the research. Yeah, you know all. Suddenly started you realizing you know very little. And that very little, we have to be very, very deep into that very little. When I first engaged with the Saudi people, um, they kind of like, what do you know about my country? That was their impression. They started questioning me because I was prepared with what I was speaking. I told them like, I researched this, and I know from this. Then they started getting trust in me, and then they actually had a good conversation with me. So it's as a researcher, when we are looking at a country that we don't know, they don't know us, to bring that trust, to bring that we have done our homework is very important.
Great, great point. Well, Dr. Vijay Laxmi, thank you very much. And for those students watching this video, I hope that this was a meaningful conversation, even if it was rather one way, because this was not able to be live. I do hope this was impactful. Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you. Thank you.